central government, and they don't listen to locals. They have made the metro line the way they wanted, decided in Mexico City, and this is a metropolis which is 500 kilometers away from Mexico City. So it's the same kind of approach. The guys that have the money, central government, and they do what they want. They don't listen to anyone, and they want things that will show for the next elections because that's the political gain, and not really the vision in the long term that really transforms and puts the metropolis in the right track. No, so absolutely agree with what you say, Joseph.
Thank you, Pedro. By the way, we're recording this event, so I hope this is okay with everyone. So, yes, I agree with Pedro, and I think that also segs us towards the next section of the discussion, which is the barriers, Sir Dondi. So, I know you've been doing this for years, and I think we would really appreciate to hear what are the main barriers and how do you see this being.
Can I ask my colleagues maybe to answer that question? Just
Sure, sir, sure.
Maxwell, Ellie, Lynn, maybe
May,
one or two.
may I say something?
Sure,
I think
Maxwell.
part of the problem is how these projects are funded. We have such a thing called pork barrel. I'm sure you're familiar with it now. So congressmen and senators get a certain amount of money. It's a big amount of money, I know. And they scrounge around for projects to pour this money in. Okay, so what? They come up with basketball courts, whatever else. And then once in a while, they come up with a big idea like putting a flyover somewhere. Okay, but it's completely out of context. They do not have a plan to go by. They just put it wherever just to be able to spend their pork barrel. And that has been going on for years. Now, these politicians know that a very visible project is good for their political career. So we were told once, we were asking, why don't they put drainages before they build the roads? Because what happens is that they build the roads and then sometime later they decide to put in they dig up everything, put in a drainage. He said, well, because the drainage cannot be seen. It's not visible. But a flyover is. Okay, so that's how it's been. They've been building pedestrian overpasses wherever, It's a pitched battle where we fight them all the time, but they blindside us. Like recently, they've been proposing again, another flyover that's going to be like 3 kilometers long, 3 or 4 kilometers. Can you imagine? I said, when all the other cities in the world are demolishing their major infrastructure like that. Just this afternoon, we were discussing how these things fragment communities. Now, there are social costs actually to these things. We've been trying to explain this to them that you don't do that in the inner cities. No, probably at the entrances to the city, but not right in the middle of the city, especially if our city is, historic. It diminishes so much of the historicity of the city. We've been explaining that to them for several times already, repeatedly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Max. I think I feel your frustration.
Can I add to what
Sure.
Maxwell said? Because it's actually worse than that. It's not just the pork barrel funds. Like Maxwell and I sit on the Infrastructure Development Committee of the Regional Development Council. And I can tell you that all the projects that we have proposed that are based on sound expert planning are not approved on the national level. And not only 90% of the approved projects all emanate from congressmen. So this now goes beyond the pork barrels. This is now national budget for infrastructure development. And this happens throughout the Philippines.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can feel the maybe you mentioned earlier also, Sir Don, the governance was one of the, maybe I can let's direct towards the Metro Cebu. I know I've read that there are plans to institutionalize the board, and is this something that's being looked into by the, or is this a challenge that is still there? I think this is pretty key in terms of how the financing and so forth in terms of authority. I know it's all a mess, but what are your thoughts on this?
So, can I refer to Evelyn and to Ellie, no? Because they're very close to this effort at the moment.
Sure, sir. Are you there, Miss Liam?
No, Evelyn.
Dondi?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Hi, ma'am. Good evening.
Naxi here. Yes. Yeah,
Hi.
so basically, yeah. Thank you, Mark, and of course, Mr. Pedro and the rest. We've been talking about having really a metropolitan Cebu for many years, not just during the formation of the Mega Cebu program or MCDCB since 2011. There were attempts both at the lower house and in the upper house to really have an authority, a development authority. Of course, inspired by MMDA, and even in terms of the inspiration, of course, as we know, for MMDA is really also Metro Vancouver. So there have been attempts, but it goes back to the same, I would say, the same barriers that both Pedro, Dondi, and architect Maxwell mentioned. It's really the element of politics. No? In this case, of course, in Metro Cebu, you have 13 local government units plus the province. And the need to bring them all together to share that perspective of really metropolitan development and how each LGU relates to each other. That's not an easy task. I mean, we've been trying to really bring them together through this platform. But as you know, each term, each LGU, each mayor has its own term. So there are personal differences in among some of them. So that's what also really keeps them from considering really looking at the matter from a metropolitan perspective. So yes, there have been, and we continue to push for this Mega Cebu Development Authority. In fact, we have through Dondi and his links also with the Senate, really sharing also with the committee headed by Senator Marcos, and then of course at the lower house with former Congressman, well, the late Congressman Del Mar. So, but it's always a very difficult challenge. So now what we're trying to do is, in the absence of such formal institutional platform, we are now working at it on a more LG specific basis. The advocacies that Mega Cebu is doing is really being pushed at the LGU level, and where we are able to bring in 2 or 3 LGUs, then that's how we do it. Because bringing everyone together to really push for the same agenda is not that easy. Maintaining that platform is not easy, and you have a 3-year horizon where you have a perhaps different leadership all the time. So while we are not giving up on the possibility of really pushing for it, but right now our approach has really been on an LGU by LGU basis, really doing things that we can do and really push at the level, and of course things that are really shall we say the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But we still continue to work with and push with the national government agencies, the different roadmaps and master plans that have been done and facilitated through MCDCB. So whether you're looking at drainage master plan, the urban transport master plan, and even now working on water, we're still really working with the mandated national agencies and other instrumentalities, apart from LG-specific initiatives. So yes, governance is important, but governance is really about people. So that's where the challenge lies.
Yes, sir, Don.
I wanted to add that here, one of the barriers is obviously is the LGU code of the Philippines, which provides really profound powers, to the various LGUs, and they can invoke those powers to avoid collaboration, to avoid following master plans, etc. And I, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie and Naxi, they're even strengthening this,
Yes.
to devolve more
By-
power
yeah.
to the LGU.
Yeah. Yeah, with the Mandanas ruling by 2022, the LGUs will have more resources at their disposal. So in fact, the decision for many of these projects will now be downloaded to the LGUs. So there's a decentralization.
This will cause problems if you want to
Yes.
solve metro-wide problems. No?
Yes.
I
So-
think we've long concluded that part of the solution would be to insulate the planning function from, the vagaries of 3-year cycles of changes in administration and all that. You cannot pursue a long-term plan if you plan in short segments like 3 years. And it has been a habit of people, I mean politicians, to throw away everything as soon as a new administration comes in. They do not respect whatever has been there or has been planned for, unspent money on. So it's weird. I don't know if it requires a change in the constitution to make the planning bodies insulated from the local politicians. And then you're right, Dondi, the new Mandanas ruling will give a lot of money to the local politicians. And I don't know how they're going to they'll spend that. They'll be casting about for
Flyover,
project.
more flyovers.
Yeah.
Maybe
Very good.
if I may, for the benefit of our colleagues who are unfamiliar with the local government code, so it's basically a 1991 law that allowed local government units or cities and municipalities to manage their own jurisdiction. Really provided a lot of power. The national government provided a lot of power, and maybe I think the main barrier is pretty clear. It's really the challenge of politics, and right now in Cebu, I think it's very evident that patronage politics is still prevalent. I'd like to turn over or segue towards now some question and answer, and I'd like to ask Pedro. He mentioned earlier about Barcelona. It's a business-led, businessman-led, private-led planning management. Pedro, would you care to share how did Barcelona initiate this? Maybe Cebu can look
No,
into it.
no, it's more of a sociological appreciation. No, the same thing happens in Medellin. No, there are cities which are not national capitals. No, so they don't have the national power on top of them, and so the local power is more available. And it's not that the Chamber of Commerce in Barcelona runs the city. The city has the institutions and the municipality and the regional government and so on and so on. But no mayor of Barcelona or no mayor of Medellin will dare to run for the office without first speaking to the economic powers of the city and asking them if they are going to back him or her for that office. So it's a kind of people in the back, it's the informality of the process, but really they have the power and the capacity and the prestige, because it all matter as well of the population realizing that those businessmen that represent the city and the interests of the city, not only their own interests, are reliable. And so if you have a headlines in the newspaper of these groups against the local politician, the local politician is really in trouble. That is very difficult to manage, because obviously you can only manage that when these institutions, when these people in the private sector really are serious, reliable, and are not only thinking about their own business, but about the business of the city, because obviously if the city works, their business will work, I generally say that having a house, a dwelling, a house in a city is like having a share in a company, in a firm, And if the firm goes well, that house will increase the value. And when politicians say, no, we have to make the effort to reduce the cost of housing and to reduce the cost of renting and so on. That's fine. That's great. That's beautiful. But that means that the only city I know that has been able to reduce the cost of housing and the cost of renting has been Tokyo when they fell into a deep recession for 20 years. And obviously, if the firm called Tokyo has not the same value and is in a recession, the houses, the units of the shares of the stock exchange, which is those dwellings, reduce the value. But if not, if the city is going well, obviously, more people want to come where you are already have a capital, a share in that company, and more people want to buy shares of that company, your share goes up, and that's the natural process. I want to comment on Evelyn's mention about the mayors. That's a very deep, and I have things written on the subject, and I might share that with you, although they are in my webpage, but difficult to find maybe. No, you cannot build a metropolis with the aggregation of the mayors. No, because the mayors are thinking, as you said, Evelyn, the mayors are thinking about their own mandate, their own city they represent, and so on. And they don't want to lose an inch of power. So they will not give the metropolitan body any of the power that they already have. On the contrary, they want to gain more. And that kind of organization is what we call in constitutional terms a confederation. You put together around the table the mayors and you say, well, talk and decide. But there is not a unifying power. It's the aggregation of those powers, and that is extremely weak in terms of management, because if one mayor doesn't like the decision that the others have taken, he gets up of the table and leaves the room. And there is no way you can do that. And the other hand is that, I don't know in the Philippines, but generally in many countries, like for example, Guatemala, 90% of the public budget is in the hands of the central government, and only 10% is in the hands of the local mayors. And really, if you have to manage a metropolis and do big infrastructures, not flyovers, but metros and that kind of thing, you need a big chunk of money, and the local authorities do not have it. And obviously, the mayors, where the metro is not going to go by, they are not going to pay for that metro and so on. So you really need national money for that kind of huge investments, and the mayors are not enough. The other alternative is a decentralization of central government. I think the Philippines is a unitary constitution. No, you are not a federal constitution. Each island probably has a kind of specific status, but you are not states. No, in a unitary constitution, the problem with the big capitals, and it's the problem of Manila, is that Manila is 70% of the GDP of the Philippines. So imagine, if it's not Imelda Marcos, that obviously is the wife, but imagine a guy that will be the mayor of Mega Manila, no? He will be managing 70% of the GDP of the Philippines. So next day, he will say, the national president, why don't you go away? Because I am running 70% of the Philippines. So I am really the one that is in power. So go away and leave your place to me, no? So the central governments in those countries where the capital is a huge chunk of the GDP, they don't want to have metropolitan power in the hands of a single body, because it's a confrontation, a political confrontation. So in those cases, as you cannot have this kind of singular metropolitan body with the political power and finance, because then they overrun the national government, what you can do is a delegation of the president, no, like Marcos did with Imelda, no, someone that is of your full confidence, and you say, well, you minister of the capital or vice minister of the president, please do focus on running the metropolises and coordinating the ministers, because you cannot just make a transport system. You have to do the transport system, the land use of commerce and industry. You have to do the health, you have to do the education, you have to do all the things together, because that is a plan, the holistic, as you mentioned, Joseph, the holistic approach to development, and not piecemeal and scattered and disjointed. So a vice president of the nation, which is really coordinating the ministers in the areas of the metropolis, might be some kind of delegation, decentralization, but not a political power that will confront you. So that is, and as the central government is the one that has the money, it's the one that really can address the big infrastructures necessary in the metropolis, which are extremely necessary because metropolis cost more to run, but produce much more than the rest of the country. In most in countries which are developed and have a good share of development around the country, the metropolis are generally 30% more efficient than the rest of the country. And if you go into Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur is 1000%, is 10 times more efficient than the rest of the country. So the metropolis require a lot of investments, but you get out of them much more than you have put into them. So that's why the big countries really have metropolis that are working very well, and that's the spearheading of the world, no? And that has a national dimension. It's something that has to be seen at national level, and not by the aggregation of the mayors that do not have the money, do not have the will to leave power for that, and so on. So it's a bit of a mess and never works. But the central governments, as they don't want to delegate, they say, well, mayors get together and decide, and they never decide.
I wonder
Thank you,
how
Pedro.
they do it in Bangkok. I think Bangkok is run by a governor, right? And then under
Well,
him are several.
you have several. Well, the example all around the world that is always put as the metropolis, not very democratic, but works very well, is Singapore. Why does Singapore work so well? Because it's a national government, and they deal with taxes, they deal with transport, with health, education, they deal with everything. And that's the way of managing a metropolis, when you have the capacity to articulate all that, no? And there is, it's a very long discussion, no? And I would love to have it, and if I can help, I help. But for instance, when we had federal governments like in the United States or in Mexico or in Argentina, a federal government was afraid that the capital could be in hands of someone that will confront the national president. So you have the federal districts, no? Washington was a federal district, Buenos Aires as well. And in a federal district, the mayor was not appointed, was not elected, was appointed by the president. So this is this kind of framework. The problem is that these federal districts were made in the 19th century, and they did not have the dimension of the metropolis. They were only the core of the metropolis. For instance, Washington, D.C., the core of the metropolis, the District of Columbia, is 600,000 people, and the metropolis is 4.5 million people. So really, it's only 15% of the metropolis. But since then, the ideology around the world has changed, and now Mexico, Buenos Aires, and now they are thinking, and Washington, they have said, well, we are not afraid anymore of those mayors. Let them be elected by the population, and they are devolving, because that is the devolution. It's not the delegation, decentralization. This is a devolution in constitutional terms, and that is not working. That is not working because they become one mayor as the others, and they get into the fight, the daily fight, and so on. Is not working. But the original idea of have a federal area that is under the direct responsibility of the president, but the problem was that was in the 19th century, and now that federal area should be much larger to include all the metropolis. But that solution has not been found. On the contrary, we are going backwards, no? But what is very clear, the metropolis cannot be made out of the aggregation of the mayors. It has to be made with an institution that gets the power and the money from central government, either by a delegation or by a devolution. And as devolution is very difficult because metropolises are very powerful and presidents are afraid of metropolis, the only solution is a delegation, a decentralization process. Sorry.
What if we remove only the planning function from all these petty, just planning, that's it. Metropolitan-wide planning, and they can
Yeah,
have the
but
rest.
yeah, but politicians do not follow plans. They always try not to follow plans. No, obviously, if the plan, if you don't follow the plan, you are put to jail. Maybe they will follow the plans, but that's never like that, because there is a administrative principle: is that you must have budgetary independence and capacity to decide the budget every year, and so the plans do not have the power to enforce on daily decisions. No. And I know I have many examples that politicians do not like plans, do not follow the plans. So if you have an institution that only makes plans and they are not followed, it becomes a decorative institution. No, you have to have the capacity to enforce those plans. So you have to have the capacity for land use requalification and for investment. If an institution only makes plans, it's no point. You have to have the capacity to decide, because there is plans and programs. The plans is in the long term what has to be done, but the program is the daily decision, the annual decision of what is the priority of the budget. And so unless you have that capacity of the priority of the budget and the programming, not the planning, the programming as well as the planning, you cannot control the metropolis. So these institutions are given the planning of the metropolis, but not the capacity of implementing. And no politician wants to give to some other institution the capacity of implementing, because that's what they want to decide, because that's their political power.
Let me thank you for that, Peter. I think this is a very interesting point of discussion, especially tackling on the governance. If we go back to the context of Cebu, Sir Dondi, Sir Maxwell, and it's a highly urbanized city, right? And as an highly urbanized city, it's part of the budget, I think, comes from the national government. And if you go back to the bridge example earlier that you mentioned, that was a national budget, right? So my question is in relation to implementation, what will work realistically in the context of Cebu right now? Should the metropolitan be the governor? Should it be the governor? Should the national government through the NEDA designate a sort of a CEO to manage Cebu, since it's because in Metro CDO where we recently had the session, it recently finished its metropolitan plan, and one of their plan is to hire or to tap a CEO to manage the Metro Cebu. So in your experience in the context of Cebu, what do you think will work? Also in relation to what Pedro has been saying.
There's a difference between CDO or Iloilo and Cebu. First of all, there are a lot more political units within Cebu. You have 44, if I'm not 54, forgot how many LGUs and municipalities. So it's very large. And as Naxi mentioned a while ago, there's a lot of difficulties, relationship difficulties between the different LGU leaders. No? I really like what Maxwell suggested, no? That maybe you can devolve planning away from the LGUs. But then again, what Pedro mentioned, this body must also have the ability to enforce, you know, and to invest and to obtain investments. The way I see it at the moment, to try to say this is a good idea, but it needs a law. It's almost, you know, you're 5 years, 10 years down the line. So we need to find, and by the way, Pedro, I really appreciate your comments because they were very practical. We need to find how we can work within the existing laws while we are lobbying for improvements in the law. You know? Me personally, I'm not so keen on saying, oh yeah, let's go change the law. This needs to be, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Honestly speaking, I'm 61 years old. I don't want to spend the rest of my life chasing idiot politicians, pardon the expression, politicians to do something that I know they should be doing. I'd rather spend it, you know, doing more life qualitative stuff. You know? So yes, the question. So what is the Cebu? What should Cebu do? I think one of the things that we are doing is of course trying to institutionalize our organization. You know? I think we should continue doing that. That's entirely possible within 2 to 3 years if it's done correctly, and and we have the right support. Number two, and I think one of our weaknesses in our organization is that we have not created a movement, a demand from the people that something must be done, that we do have problems and there are solutions, and that you in the government must provide these solutions and not become barriers to development. Because I would say the biggest barrier to development in Cebu and in the Philippines is government. And that's so it's easier probably to create a voice, a much larger voice from what we were trying to do, to begin to hold politicians accountable, especially when it comes to election. Okay. Number three, and Naxi mentioned this, and I also see where we made a mistake based on your comments, Pedro. We were trying to create this huge metropolis with 13 mayors, and that was a mistake. So what we have unevolved is now, as Naxi mentioned, now we're working with a smaller coalition of the willing, who want to work together, and who may, because you are beginning to see, I think, more, how do you call it, more enlightened politicians, especially among the younger crop, if they are of any substance or quality. So this is what we're doing now. And this is something that we've seen will probably be a good idea for something to continue. You need low-hanging fruits. You need to show people victories. You can't wave a master plan in front of the population because it's a meaningless piece of paper. They have to see how it's going to affect them. And they have to feel it more than just see it. So this is the way I see, the way forward. Bearing in mind your comments, Pedro, which are just, wow. I mean, I'm sure all of us here from Cebu are just saying, wow, why didn't we think of this before? And it's like we've been making a mistake. Yeah, I think, go ahead, Pedro, you wanted to say something.
You're muted.
Pedro, you're muted.
Yes, I agree with you, Joseph, that I hate laws, because they take so long, and at the end, the outcome is a kind of mix that doesn't work because everyone has tried to change that article and that other article and so on and so on. What I'm suggesting, and I'm not suggesting that for Cebu, because I don't know the structure of Cebu or the political organization. I don't know if you have a governor of the island or something like that, and if that governor has real power or has no power and so on. So I'm not talking about Cebu. I am more talking about national capitals, What I am suggesting, this kind of delegation, is the president appointing his vice president as the guy in charge of coordinating the investments of the nation in a specific area. And then that vice president calls for the meeting of the ministers which are doing investments in that area and coordinates those investments. That kind of thing is done by an executive order on Monday morning, and the committee meets on Tuesday morning. So you really don't need any kind of law, because it's the potestas, the capacity of the government to organize itself into ministries, and especially if it's only coordination. And obviously the vice president, if he's vice president, he's of the confidence of the president, and he has more authority than the minister, and he's able to organize the ministers on coordinating the investments in a rational and visionary way in a metropolis. I'm talking about national capitals, In the case of Cebu, I don't know if the governor has the capacity to coordinate the mayors. We will have to have a session on Cebu where someone will explain me, and I will try to find some solutions or ideas that can help to discussion, for the discussion.
Okay.
The reality on the ground, of course, is that in the Philippines, the president and the vice president belong to different parties. And our present case right now,
Yeah, I was going to
they're
mention
like
that.
cat and dog.
So they are enemies. Oh my God.
Yeah,
enemies.
that's another guy.
Mortal
Exactly.
enemies.
Yeah, that's another challenge. But yeah, I think yeah, we're reaching the 1 hour mark for the Metro X, and I think this has been a very interesting discussion. And I think Sir Dondi really synthesized it. The 3 points: the institutionalization of Metro Cebu board, the coalition of the willing, and I would like to emphasize the movement. I think this is really very important, and from IMF, this is one of the things that we really are pushing. That's why we're doing this Metro X and other events. So I think this is just the start. This has been a very interesting discussion, and I'd like to give the floor to Sir Dondi for any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us. Any takeaways from this?
Well, first of all, wow. I mean, the experience, for example, of the sharing of Pedro's experience, and we'd love to talk to you some more, Pedro, and of everyone in this forum. Is fantastic. I don't regret missing 1 hour of Netflix by being in this. I really enjoyed this one Friday night hour, even if I didn't have a glass of wine in front of me. What I can say, though, is that the danger really is frustration. Where, for example, Maxwell, Naxi, Ellie, Lynn, and myself, where we've been pushing and pushing, for over a decade now, and seeing, and we have, like I said, fabulous, saying, we've got we know what we need done, and yet you come across these political barriers constantly, and it's happily forums like this are actually quite encouraging. It gives you more energy. I have more energy about what we were trying to do now than I had 1 hour ago. Let's put it that way. I think it's one of the beauties of this network. Yeah. So takeaway, we need a voice. The private sector must have a louder and united voice. It's otherwise the politicians are not going to respond. Our politicians spend 3 years campaigning. That dynamic has to change without having to resort to changing the constitution. It's not going to happen. So thank you, and thank you for my colleagues here who've been with us. We've been together now for a hell of a long time.
Yes. Anyone wants to share their final thoughts before I turn over to Pedro for the closing? Sir Maxwell or Sir Ma'am?
I think Dondi summarized it very well. Yeah, that's my fear also. We can only go so far. It's so tiring talking to this television, facing all of this. It's like uphill all the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why, Maxwell, if we can, again, I think we have to work on creating a movement the way you guys created the movement for Livable Cebu, which was very powerful. And then there'll be succession to us.
Yeah. Getting the younger people involved, because I don't think we're getting any younger.
Yeah. We're not.
So I hope this starts a movement. We can continue conversations. From IMF, we're very happy really to have you here, and it was very enlightening discussion. 1 hour. I agree with Sir Dondi. It's worth 1 hour missing Netflix. Yeah, so in behalf of IMF, I'd like to thank our guest. It was really an informative discussion, and we look forward to the next steps on this. Thank you, everyone. Keep safe, and see you again soon.
Happy weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.